You're listening to The Front Lines, a podcast for the people that truly make mountain biking happen. Not the riders, racers, or product designers, but the builders, advocates, and the often forgotten board members of your local mountain bike trail association. I'm going to assume that the vast majority of listeners are mountain bikers, so I believe that you can understand how devastating it would be to suddenly not be able to ride your bike. Mountain bikes are often referred to as being able to go anywhere, but the adaptive mountain bike can be for anyone. And what's even more amazing is that they allow anyone to go almost anywhere. An adaptive mountain bike can quite literally be a second chance, an opportunity for someone to ride again. But imagine you have no place to ride that bike, or the trail that your bike fits on has a gate or a rock at the entrance. I'm going to speak with Tara Yanis today about adaptive mountain bikes, also known as AMTBs. But before we chat, I'd suggest taking a look at what an AMTB is. Included in the show notes is a link to Tara's website that has a number of photos and videos. I've also included a link to a YouTube video so you can see the bike in action. So welcome to episode 3 of Front Lines. Tara Yanis started racing professionally in 1996, but on September 1st, 2007, she suffered a spinal cord injury while racing in Beaver Creek, Colorado, and it left her in a wheelchair. Tara is now the owner and operator of Tara Yanis Industries, promoting and selling adaptive mountain bikes. Hi, Tara. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Brent. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I left out a couple of chapters in that intro, and perhaps you could fill in the gaps for us. What happened after your accident?
I was in Colorado. I'm originally from California, so I was in Colorado, and I ended up being in the hospital there for a few months, just trying to do some rehab, trying to get back to sort of the basics of living and how I was going to sort of, be able to take care of myself, and how everything was worked. So yeah, I went through that rehab, and then I went back home. I continued with the rehab probably for another, year and a half. And then it was sort of right around, the rehab was great and I loved every second of it. But the difficult thing was sort of like, you had to go. You had to be there every day for you to make some gains. And so for me, I kind of felt like I had to make a decision as to whether I wanted to continue doing that every day, all day, or if I wanted to just sort of continue with my life and get on with things. And so that's kind of what I did. And then ended up moving to Canada, with my partner. And then, yeah, I think it took me a few years really to probably, to be honest, it probably took me about 5 years to really figure out what was next. And, to when something happens so abruptly and you kind of see yourself going in this direction and then it just sort of makes a right-hand turn, I think I was probably pretty jumbled for a while and figuring out where I fit in.
How did you first start riding an adaptive mountain bike? When did that come in?
I started riding, I think it was around 2012. I wanted to get back into riding probably a year after my injury, but there really wasn't any equipment. Like there wasn't, that I could find anyway, like equipment that I really wanted to ride, that was really high tech, that had, suspension and that could really handle the terrain. And so I didn't really want to ride a road hand cycle. I just really wanted to be in the mountains. So it was like years later, I was up in Canada and some friends of mine found this bike online, and it was made in Poland. And It was called a Sport On, and it was like, I mean, it was really aggressive. Like you could tell the design behind it, was just super cool. And so anyway, they did a fundraiser and I got the bike, and I was just really blown away because I hadn't seen anything like this bike before. You know, there are a handful of people that still ride the four wheelers, which are great and they're loads of fun. But they don't have cranks. And for me, I really just wanted to be independent. I wanted to be able to leave the house and be able to go on a ride and not have to rely on a chairlift or a shuttle run. So anyway, yeah, I got this bike, and it was just so cool to finally be able to be on a mountain again, because it had been like, 6, 7 years or something since I'd been on dirt and able to ride on stuff that I wanted to ride, not just like a fire road, but like a gnarly kind of trail. So that was, I think mentally and emotionally was just like, wow, okay, now what can I do? Now where can we go with this?
I'm familiar with the four-wheeled version. Some might have seen it in the Whistler Bike Park or any type of bike park, but can you describe your bike?
So that's kind of the difference with this bike is the Sport On bike. It has three wheels. It has two in the front, one in the back, for the downhill bike slash all mountain bike. Yeah, it has cranks, internal hub, full suspension, disc brakes. So it's got all really high tech equipment on it. And so that's and it also can come with electric assist, which is huge for us, for anybody using their upper body. I think especially, it's super helpful to have.
Have you ever tipped the bike?
I'm not going to lie. Yeah, the bike, when you get to a certain point, it will tip. Same with the XCR. I think that goes for probably any adaptive mountain bike or bike for that matter. So, but one thing that I do always sort of try to reassure people, like if they are looking at the bike and that's one of the first things that they say is, oh my gosh, you're in the Explorer bike, you're head first and, you're so close to the ground. Doesn't that, scare you? And I always kind of think of it like, well, if I were if I was on an able-bodied bike, I'd be like 3 feet, off the ground. Whereas now I'm only about a foot off the ground. So, if I do tip over, I don't have far to go. So I've tipped the bike, numerous times, and it's, I don't know, it's never been that big of a deal. And I can tip it back over on my own. So I don't even need anybody there to help me.
How did the idea of selling these bikes come about?
After I had the bike for probably a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, I was online and I was looking at the Sport On website again, and I realized that because there were so many people when I was out on the trails asking me about the bike. People that had friends that were in chairs, or people that were in chairs that were out on, like a hike, and they saw me and, they were super interested. And I realized that there was no one in Canada selling these bikes. And I thought, this is crazy. Like, we have some of the best mountain biking in the world, and, we should be able to get out there and to give people, this experience. And I'm partial to it, obviously, too, because I just love mountain biking so much. But, so I just contacted Sport On and I said, hey, you guys don't have anyone up here. What would you think of me selling these bikes? And so we just, worked it out. And next thing you know, I'm, selling the bikes. And then.
When was that?
That had to have been 2013, 2014. Yeah, probably right at the end of 2013. So, and then when that sort of happened, I think this was my first venture is having my own business, so I was learning a lot on the fly and continue to.
I noticed while I was on your website that your company's logo is a phoenix, and is there some significance to that?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's funny that you say that. I had a guy help me with a logo, and I'd given him some ideas of what I was looking for. And he came back like a couple weeks later, and he was like, I just I really had to go with the Phoenix because this is, the whole story about it, and just like being regenerated and reborn, and all of that. And I thought, you know what, he's really onto something, and he did a great job, I thought, on the logo, and his idea was way better than mine. So, and I loved the symbolic nature of it.
Mm,
Yeah, so I thought it was great.
very cool. And how much does a bike cost?
So we have two different models of the bike. One is a cross country model. One is a downhill model. The cross country model starts around $6,500, and then the Explorer, which is the downhill model, starts around 10,500. So that's a lot of money. So and I know that there's a lot of people that get grants, and that's great. But there's a lot more people out there that don't get grants, and that are in need. And so I started sort of realizing that, okay, well, we want to sell these bikes, and we really need a community. I know that there's people out there that want to ride these bikes, and they just can't afford it. And if they're going to get some sort of sporting equipment, it's usually like a tennis or a basketball chair. So let's get people outside. So I started trying to figure out, how do we do that? How do we, grow that? So I started contacting different adaptive organizations, like Whistler Adaptive Sports in Chelsea, and then trail builders and land managers, because there'd be, like, I'd go out on rides, and there'd be certain obstacles for me that I had to figure out. And if I was by myself, there's good handful of those rides I wouldn't have even been able to do, because I couldn't get through a gate, or I couldn't, because they're, I get it, they're made to keep ATVs out, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what types of trails are required for an AMTB?
Well, the bikes are 3.2 feet wide, so a little over 3 feet. So we just need something wide enough. So, for me, like, I'm learning this as I go also, not only just being a rider, but talking to trail builders and talking to land managers, and figuring out the best way to go about making an AMTB trail, if you were making a specific trail. So, but right now, I mean, it's really the width, so like for a beginner trail, I think it should be, like 4.5 feet wide, if not a little wider. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of fire road and double track that's available. And right now, to be honest with you, I mean, there's a lot of trails on the North Shore that I can ride without, any changes. But, like, so basically the main thing is being wide enough. And then, steepness is always a factor. And what I find also is the off camber, how off camber and how angled are some of the trails in different places. There's so many different types of injuries. Like, I'm what you would call, I guess, a T12 paraplegic. So I lose function right below my waist. So I'm fortunate because I have most of my abs, but there's a lot of people that don't have like any ab function at all. So it gets tricky when you get into off camber sections, because if you can't hold yourself up, and there's a lot of different sorts of strapping that different people use, depending on their level of injury, while sitting in the bike. But, that is something that I've sort of come across, that I found it to be more difficult for others, when you get to a real off camber section. So, I'd say, yeah, with, how steep the off camber is, and also just the trailhead, and can you get into the trailhead? Is there a gate? Is there a big boulder? Things like that. Or, if you are able to get through the front gate, are there other gates past that? And then what do you do?
So what would you say to a trail association or a land manager who wants to try to either create a specific use trail, or potentially look at their existing infrastructure? Like, what's the best way to start? Is it do a lot of these groups have an opportunity to just take existing infrastructure and expand on it, or is it a case where the vast majority of communities will need to create a new purpose-built trail?
I think that there'll be opportunities for both.
Hmm.
I really do. I mean, the first trail that I was able to ride on the North Shore. Well, I shouldn't say that I was able to ride. I mean, there were other trails that I could ride, but there was an already existing trail on Frome called bobsled, and it was almost wide enough. And it's a really perfect loop because you can ride the fire road up, probably takes 20 minutes at a decent pace, and then you can do a lap. So that was really fun for me to be able to just do these laps and not have to, hoof it for, like an hour or something. But so that's where an instance where they took a trail that was already there, already existing, and said, hey, let's get some funding, which they did through Lululemon, I believe. And they put in, I think, like 20,000, and they went through and they widened the whole trail. They widened the bridges. That is another thing, or obviously having bridges wide enough.
Mm.
I've been on some bridges that I swear they were exactly 3.2 feet wide. So it was kind of cool because it was kind of like a skinny for me, but it's, yeah. So for beginners though, like you really want something a bit wider, but, so yeah, they took that trail and they just widened it from top to bottom and they did a fantastic job. But there are, I'm sure that there will be purpose built trails, for different instances. And as I kind of go through this and the more that I sort of talk to, the trail builders and land managers, I really want to be more engrossed in that and just feel like I've really wrapped my head around how we can all make, things work. And, I realize that, we can't just go out and ask, we want all these new trails built. I don't think that's necessary. I think there's a lot of trails that we can totally work with to minimize cost, hopefully.
Yeah. So really retrofitting it seems like it's a huge option.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. So you mentioned width, camber. Those are two limitations. Is there anything else that causes issues for an AMTB?
I'd say in some cases, how steep the trail is for sure. Our cross country bike is different in the design where we have one wheel in the front and two in the back. And the front wheel is the driving wheel. So, if you get, I would probably say on any adaptive mountain bike that has that front wheel drive, at some point it's going to get steep enough that you're going to start to spin out. So, I do think also that the trails, it will differ which bike that you're on. The Explorer is so capable. It has so much clearance and it has full suspension, where the XCR, the cross country bike, is a hardtail, and it doesn't have that same give. So, and suspension setup. So it will require a different type of trail that cannot take the same amount of off camber as even a downhill bike. I feel.
And is clearance a limitation for sure? Like, is it are you rubbing up against the bottom of the bike, or is it something where it can roll over quite a bit?
I have for sure, but I haven't bottomed out near the amount that I thought I would when I see, like a tricky, steeper section or big rocks coming up where I feel like I'm gonna hit and then I don't. So it's kind of surprised me in a lot of different ways. The XCR, yeah, you would rub more on that just because you just don't have the same. It's a little lower and you don't have the same suspension.
Last week we were at a land managers meeting, and there was a young boy there, and he shared a pretty incredible story about getting one of your older bikes and utilizing that. How did you meet him?
Well, it was sort of online first. Tyler from Pink Bike had shot me a message, and we kind of had played email tag for a little bit. And then through another organization, because I played wheelchair tennis also, they had asked me to go to GF Strong to kind of do this little fun tennis thing. So I went out there, and Lucas was there with his mom and dad. So I got a chance to meet him, and this kid has got like 1,000-watt smile, and he just melted me right there. So he, like, he's pretty shy. He was, I think, when I met him, he was 7. And his mom and dad, Mike and Alon, were just, they're a mountain bike family, they're a cycling family. Their other son Corey rides too, and so now they wanted to be able to still do it together as a family, and for Lucas to be able to, continue going out and playing with his friends and being able to be part of that community still, and just hang out with his friends basically. And so, so yeah, we met up, and I told him, I said, I've never sold a bike to a kid. We don't actually make a kid's model right now. I really, really hope that we do in the future, because I think it's a really under tapped sort of, market that these kids really need. Just to be able to continue to be active, and have the same amount of options as everybody else does. So anyway, we met up, and I went to like the foam shop, and I got this super thick foam, and I was trying to figure out, all right, how can we get this to fit for him? And we like duct taped his legs in, and the family was all for it. Like, it was all totally above board there. And he loved it. Like, he got in it, and he took off, and he rode for like an hour and a half, and we couldn't even get him out. Like, he just was smiling the whole time. So anyway, so then they kind of went out for another second loop, and I was talking to Mike, his dad, and he just sort of had made a comment that, we looked online for a long time for something for Lucas, but we wanted something that looked cool too. I mean, that's a big deal. You want something that looks cool. And that was kind of one of the things that really took me to this bike also, was just the look of it. It was just something like I hadn't seen online before. So anyway, so they bought the bike, and like, I mean, he's in it every day from what I understand. And, it's to be able to see young kids who are put into, a predicament where, I mean, their lives are so drastically different, and, they're going to have to figure out so many things, to be able to provide him with this bike that allows him to play with his friends, and to be outside, and physical, and to stay healthy and engaged, and part of a community. I was just like, that's what it's all about. So I feel really fortunate to have met them, really.
Cool. Very cool. So this summer you took part in an adaptive mountain bike camp up in Whistler. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
After sort of chasing down Chelsea Walker at Whistler Adaptive Sports, we actually held, finally, it was probably a little over a year from the first time that I talked to Chelsea to when we finally were able to organize this. But we were able to get Whistler Adaptive Sports got a grant through the Whistler Blackcomb Foundation for 2 bikes. And so we held the first adaptive mountain bike camp in Canada this last summer. And it was just unbelievable. I think everything went so well. And the guys that came to the camp were just, I think, blown away at the equipment and what they could ride and what they could now do. So much so that we actually ended up going up to this one lake. One of the guys, Brendan, had been up there before his injury, but it wasn't until we rode up, and it was a steep, like, climb. And without the electric assist, there's no way we would have gotten up there, but we did. And he was sitting there kind of like really in deep thought. And I went up and talked to him, and he said, I haven't been up here since my accident because I couldn't get here. So I don't know, like, it's stuff like that I don't know, I think just really hits home, and to be able to help people get to those places. So so that was through Whistler Adaptive Sports. And the adaptive organizations, if anybody out there knows of an adaptive organization that mainly does, sit skiing, which a lot of them do, and a lot of them got started through sit skiing, but now, I've talked to a lot of them and they do want to grow their summer sports. So, if anybody knows an adaptive organization that's interested in BC, or in Canada, period, my main focus right now is BC because that's where I'm at, and I can get to people.
So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
You can always check out my website, tarayanasindustries.com. You can email me, info@tarayanasindustries. Ask away and we'll see what we can do.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Tara. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brent. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one. So here's your opportunity to interact with the show. Please, if you've got questions, comments about the discussion we had today, send them over to me. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter @BrentskiBikeski, or you can send me an email, brent@bikeski.ca. As of this week, we are now live on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. So please help others find us by leaving a review and giving us a rating. Once again, huge thanks to Lee Rosevear for the song Tech Toys. Next week, we'll ask the question, do we need to change the name of our trails? Is it funny or just plain offensive? How far is too far? I'm Brent Hillier. This is Frontlines. Thanks for listening, and happy trails.